Okay. What's up, everybody? Okay, this is a big one. Where to start? Okay. Hey, everybody, how you doing? Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. I'm Mike. I'm your host. Merry Christmas, I guess. Happy Hanukkah, and a crazy Kwanzaa. Happy Saturnalia if you're in a death cult. Get your mistletoe belt buckles ready. I've got a special holiday edition, or as close as I'm willing to get. We're going to talk a little bit about the past history of Santa, and to equal or lesser degree, Krampus as well. Man, there's a lot of equally disturbing material that goes along with this. That's what's up for our Weird this week. Also, we're going to close out on a very it's a rough crime story. But it's going to be chock full of my own base speculation, a little bit of conspiracy theory to a degree at the end. But today's main subject is, how did an outsider artist from the turn of the century potentially reveal a vast conspiracy involving a secret society with advanced technology for their age? That's on today's show, so stay tuned. Man, like I said, this is this is going to be a complicated one. I'm going to try and do my best to put it all together as well as I can, as far as our main topic goes, because this is a big, just time-spanning thing. Got Breakaway Civilization stuff, secret space program stuff, or at least it leads into that. This may end up being a two-parter. Like I said, it's a huge subject. I think what I'm going to do is, it's such a huge subject that I would say the turning point is probably around World War II. So we may start with the 1800s, which is about where it begins, and then work our way up to World War II, and then maybe from World War II up to today. We'll save that for the next episode. I have a way that this kind of works with some of the people I want to talk about, kind of leads into it. But the main subject of our show today is a man by the name of Charles Dellschau. But before we get into him, what's weird this week? Now, I got a little strange audio I want to play for you. I thought I'd include it in this episode. I'm going to try and make this a fairly regular thing, just throwing weird audio at you guys to check out. But this tangentially has to do with the main topic of today's show. This is a recording found by two Italian radio operators back in the, I want to say, 1950s or 60s. This is a distress signal from a lost cosmonaut that they unintentionally found and were able to channel through their radios, and it goes a little something like this.
Ну, как наша передача будет теперь 41? Как наша передача будет теперь 41? Так, не жарко, не жарко. Делать, делать. Не жарко, не жарко, не жарко. Слышите, слышите, не жарко. Прямо. Так. Я вижу прямо. Не жарко, не жарко. 32. Так. 41, 41. Ага. Не жарко, не жарко. 15 минут. Вот.
So yes, quite distressing. God, I couldn't imagine being the first to hear that, to tune into that on my radio as it was happening. That would, yeah, melt my brain. Maybe not as bad as her brain got melted. Oh, no, I'm sorry. She was a brave woman, whoever she was. Sorry. We salute you, Lost Cosmonaut. So yeah, moving on. It's the holidays, despite what we may feel about that. God, give me strength. So, Christmas, right? Let's get it out of the way. I already need a Valium from how much I don't want to deal with it. So, yeah. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but, you know, Christmas is all about Jesus' birthday, right? So they say. But it's also chock full of all kinds of pagan shit. And I use the term pagan very loosely. I denote the word pagan maybe more with like nature worship and things like that, and just I use it not as a pejorative term, but yes, lots of pre-Christian, I would say even like ancient mystery religion type stuff associated in with Christmas. Of course, everyone kind of knows about Saturnalia, I think, at this point. So, like I said earlier, if you're in a Saturn death cult, Mary, whatever, however you want to put it. But, yeah, Saturn. Satan! And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the Saturn death cult idea. If not, God, how do I encapsulate that quickly? Basically, Saturn, the planet, used to be our sun, way back in a supposed golden age, and Saturn, the god, aka Kronos, was the dude in charge until he ate his babies. Essentially, that's what the powers that be, who are secretly in control of the world now, are doing. There's some stuff about a black cube, and the planet Saturn has a black cube on the top of it at its north pole. Yeah, it's a massive multiplayer online RPG. You're gonna have to go look into it because I can no way encapsulate it all here, but it is quite interesting. I will say that. Maybe in the future. Maybe we'll cover it all in the future. Who knows? We'll see. So not only are there connections with Saturnalia, but there are also connections with the Templars, apparently. And now, some of this, I hesitate to use the word reaching, but there are some fairly decent mythological and religious strings that tie some of this stuff together. Like the whole Santa Claus being wearing red and white, for example. This can be associated with the Templars. This can also be associated, and there's more Templar associations as well, as like Saint Nicholas, and who, by the way, is the patron saint of sex workers. So there you go. There's that. Just thought that was an interesting tidbit. Also, there are connections with the Mithras cults of way back in the day, because the red and white pointed hat, aka the Phrygian cap, I believe they call it, that's also a huge influence on a lot of this stuff, as well as Odin being a huge influence on the modern portrayal of Santa Claus. especially the whole Father Christmas / Santa Claus thing, and shamanism to a big degree, and I mean psychedelic shamanism, because of the red and white capped Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Or is it? Maybe it's fly agaric. Either one, the mushrooms. Red and white cap. You know the ones. The kind that make Mario grow big. Anywho, aside from that, this is where you get into the really weird shit. So back to the Templar connection. Apparently, the Templar connection expands with Santa Claus because in certain countries, especially the old country, i.e. Europe, you have Santa Claus being more or less accompanied by the character we all know and love, Krampus, right? But Krampus is apparently extrapolated mythologically from the Sabbatic goat, Baphomet, etc. So you have like the black goat of the witches, Sabbat, and then, the hermaphroditic idol, Baphomet, that the Templars supposedly worshipped. And from out of that is where you get into these crazy, and I mean crazy, and this is really like the main thing I wanted to talk about as far as this Christmas stuff goes. So, like I said, everyone knows about Santa, they know about Krampus, but you have these other weird sort of tangential characters from around the world, right? So I'm just going to read off some of them and just some of their, more finer points, because like I said, we've got a big topic today, and I am just, I'm already sweating profusely just by sitting here talking. So we've got Belsnickel, right? Belsnickel is a giant masked wild man who is also a child eater. And there's a lot of that too. There's going to be a lot of like child eaters and child snatchers who I don't know. Once again, Krampus, he's constantly got his tongue sticking out. He's like licking children, and he's like, there's all these old postcards with him as well, where there's like a lady Krampus as well, who looks like a human being, but she's just decorated up like a Krampus and whatnot. But there's all these weird old postcards of very, I'm going to say overtly sexual tension between Krampus and various women, which alludes to all kinds of unsavory sexual acts that I won't specify. Use your imaginations, people. They'll serve you better than I will. So yeah, outside of Krampus, like I said, you got Belsnickel. And yes, the theme of just child theft and weird shit. Out of that, you've got the Kinderfressen and the Kinderschrecken. The Kinderschrecker is the child scarer, and then you have the Kinderfresser, which is the child swallower. So once again, there's these sort of, man, God, the old country, weird shit. Fucking Europe, dude. Can you imagine? Then you've got Frau Perkta, also known as the Belly Slitter. This one is particularly disturbing. I've seen like old paintings and representations of her. She looks like a woman with a giraffe neck. And she's covered in cloaks. She's a shape-shifting Christmas demon. This is just a weird one. There's this Christmas tradition in southern France, I want to say, and Spain. There's this character called Caganer, Caganer, who is basically a little red cap man, and he sits in your nativity scene and takes a shit. He's just a little man taking a shit in the background of nativity scenes. Supposedly it has to do with fertility and like I said, some of this is a stretch, but I mean, hey, I'm not the mythologist or anthropologist. This is what history brought us to today. And all this is also related to, like winter solstice festivals. It's not always, necessarily Christmas related. But it is, all the same paganistic milieu, whatever you want to call it. In Japan, they actually have these entities called the Namahage, which are very reminiscent of Krampus type figures from Europe. They're these demons that wear like all this straw, and they also, much like Saturn, have scythes and shit. and they go door to door and they scare children, and and only in Japan they admonish people for being lazy. So there's that as well. Then you've got in Russia Dead Moroz, Deadmoroz, who's basically like a frost demon mixed with like a Bigfoot of sorts. He's had modern Santa Claus incorporated more into him. So if you look at some of the more ancient representations of Dead Moroz, he is fucking terrifying. He's basically like a winter elemental. He's like a frost demon, they called him. So that's Russia. Let's see what else. We've got Haji Firuz from Persia, which I will say looks a little problematic. Don't think it'd fly over really well in America. But yeah, he has his face. He's painted blackface. Okay, so but it's not for the reason you think. It has to do with old Mithraic fire worshipping ceremonies and soot and chimneys and things like that. There's actually a lot of characters throughout Europe that are very similar. They have like the blackface thing going on, but it's not. It has nothing to do with identity politics of in any way or anything like that. It's all just soot related because these guys creep down the chimney, and they're not the only ones. This is another reoccurring thing with a lot of these folkloric characters from the old country. They creep down the chimney and either leave gifts or steal children once again, or they just get up to like all kinds of weird semi-perverse dancing around and festivities, for lack of a better word. Throughout Africa, you've got Old Man Baika, which is Old Man Beggar, who's also very similar, another sort of character who is covered in straw and sort of these weird, like, wicker dressings and whatnot with huge masks on. Interesting side note, I don't know if this was related to the Old Man Baika and, like, winter solstice festivals in Africa, but I have seen these videos in Africa. They're very compelling, I will say. I don't see how they could be faked, at least not the ones I saw. They have these rituals where these dudes dance around, and they have these grass skirt, like, straw things that are meant to be, they're like effigies, sort of monsters, demons, whatever you want to call it, and they spin them around faster and faster and faster until they sort of take on a life of their own and dance on their own. It's insane. Maybe I can find it and post it up, but yeah, craziness. Throughout France, we've got Le Père, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Le Père Foutard? Le Père Foutard, the Christmas Cannibal, a.k.a. Father Flog, or Father Beat You with a fucking bunch of sticks. Le Père Foutard, the Christmas Cannibal. It's based on a story about a man, I believe it's an innkeeper. 3 children wander into his place of business, and he up and decides to chop them up and eat them. Or, in some stories, serve them to their own parents. But then Père Noël, a.k.a. French Santa Claus, shows up and resurrects the children and makes it all better. And then Le Père Foutard, he's like, oh, no, you got me. I was gonna eat them kids. So he repents and, I don't know, decides to work with Père Noël. It's weird because there's a lot of this whole good cop, bad cop Christmas thing going on. It's very strange. I don't know why. Actually, you know what? I do know why. This sort of plays back into Saint Nicholas. There's been 6 popes named Nicholas, if I'm remembering correctly, and this sort of plays back into that character of Saint Nicholas, who was originally part of the Nicene Council, also, and the popes named Saint Nicholas, or the popes, Pope Nicholas, the 6 of them. So there's a very strong Catholic overtone to it, and as a Catholic, as a saint and a pope, you're basically expected, like, it's a done deal that you have the powers of an exorcist, so therefore you can conjure up or banish demons. And that's kind of where this idea comes from, that there's this good cop, bad cop thing going on with these guys, because these Saint Nicholas, esque characters, these archetypes are able to conjure up the other demonic goat, the goat-like Krampus monster demon thing to be their sort of bad cop, companion, traveling companion, the child eater, the child thief, etc. So if you listen to some of the theories of Dr. D.C. Armin Hillman, who bit of a kook, but I like the guy. He's a philologist. I think I've talked about him before on the older episodes, but oh boy, yeah, his take on the Catholic Church and a lot of I don't know, the exorcism rituals and things like that, and orphans and just why the Catholic Church is in so many problems that it usually is. I'll just leave it at that. So moving on, we've also got Mr. Croque-Mitaine, and he takes them to his house, or a shack of some sort that he owns, that's filled with frogs and spiders and, gross animals, and drops them off there and leaves them there to starve, basically, and then eventually returns to turn them into dolls and mannequins and, like, toy children, like fake children, to give as gifts to other children. It's extra weird. Very weird. All this is Christmas related, if I don't have to... I need to reiterate that. So, just letting you know. And then, finally, one of the scariest, at least I thought so, we have Hans Trapp. Now, Hans Trapp, this dude is based on a real person named Hans von Trotha. Obviously German. I mean, it sounds like it, right? So, Hans von Trotha was he was a cannibal. He supposedly dammed up an entire river in order to drown a whole town. This is like the real life story, supposedly. But he ended up sort of getting incorporated into folklore, and somehow he was conflated with, or became, the Christmas Scarecrow. Now, Hans von Trapp is also related to very strange stories, once again, about child thievery and something called the orphan train, which, to be honest, I've seen the orphan train talked about in other places, and I don't really want to go down that hole. It sounds like a real fucking bummer. But yeah, supposedly he's related to that somehow. This is like the orphan train is like a reoccurring thing in various folklores as well, but it's also a much more modern idea of just people selling their children because they just, they didn't have birth control back in the day. Or fancy methods like pulling out, I guess. So there's that. But yeah, the Christmas Scarecrow, basically his whole thing is he would stay in the fields, he'd dress up like a scarecrow, and just stand perfectly still, waiting for a child to come along, and then boom, just out of nowhere, he fucking stabs a kid and eats them. So yeah, these are Christmas characters. This is all Christmas related. Merry Christmas. Happy Baphomet Day. Happy Saturnalia. Happy Death Cult. Happy. Yeah. Once again, a lot of, man, I don't know, just the reoccurring themes of child thievery and eating associated with this holiday is it's disturbing. It's highly disturbing on many levels. There's actually, I got most of this information from a video on a YouTube channel called Mind Unveiled. I've gotten some information from this channel before. It's pretty good. I will warn you that their Christmas video that talks about a lot of this stuff is like over 2 hours. So if you're down for that, hey man, watch it, because they do the research. I'll give them that. But I don't know if you want to sit through all of it. It's a bit much. I will say, in some moments, though, pretty boss soundtrack. If you're into Ghost, G-O-S-T, dark synth, things like that. If you're into dark synth and you aren't listening to Ghost, I don't know what the fuck your problem is. Anywho, so that's what's weird this week. So, yeah. Oh my god. Today's main topic. Oh boy. Okay. Where to start or where to begin? We're covering a man by the name of Charles Dellschau. Charles Dellschau, like I said, he was an outsider artist, or at least that's what he's most well known for. He originally immigrated to the United States from Brandenburg, Prussia. So this was before Germany was, well, yeah, we're gonna get into some of that. Unified Germany. So there's that. This is kind of the basics from a. This is a free booklet I found online that can be downloaded by anyone. I will try to include this in show notes or on the socials. Let's see. Charles August Albert Dellschau was born in 1830 in Brandenburg, Prussia. Grew up there and at age 19 immigrated to the United States. He is believed to have arrived at the port of Galveston, Texas in 1849 and settled in Richmond, just southwest of Houston, where he worked as a butcher. An amnesty oath he signed in 1865 indicating that he had served in some capacity on the Confederate side in the Civil War describes him as 5 foot 3 inches tall with brown hair and brown eyes. The one known photograph of him suggests he was balding and paunchy. In the 1850s, he somehow became associated with a group of men in Sonora, California, that he would later call the Sonora Aero Club. The members of the club were occupied with the attempt to invent, design, and build a flying vehicle, or a number of them. The alternate history, whatever you want to call it, some would say that this is where we get into the beginning of the Breakaway Civilization conspiracy. Walter Bosley, a researcher, one of my favorites, he would say that. He would say that most definitely. As well as Jason Reza Giorgiani. It's another one of my favorites. Both those guys. Who else? Joseph Farrell, Peter Levenda. These guys are all top-notch researchers. You will be hearing a lot of stuff from sources by these guys. This episode, possibly next. We'll see. But yeah, my main source for today, it's called Origin, the 19th Century Emergence of the 20th Century Breakaway Civilization by Walter Bosley. He has another book series called The Empire of the Wheel. I've read the first one. I have the third one. Need to get the second one for continuity's sake. But the first book, very good. And then Jason Reza Giorgiani, the book I'm using with him today is called Closer Encounters, and we will be using that a bit less. I'm going to say that the Walter Bosley book is my biggest source on this, but all this ties into something that you've probably heard before or heard of before. It's called the Airship Mystery of 1897. Where does this go from Charles Dellschau in the 1860s with the Sonora Aero Club into the 1890s with the Airship Mystery? Well, like we said, the Sonora Aero Club and Charles Dellschau was composed of many men, mostly Germans, oddly enough, a couple of Italians, which, yes, this does have some bearing on the future. I will say that Walter Bosley's overall theory and mine differ. I may line up more with Jason Reza Giorgiani. Jason Reza Giorgiani's theory, he goes a little farther than my theory goes, but mine is somewhere in the middle between these two guys. I'll say that much, but I don't want to give the whole plot away just yet. So if you want to do any further research into any of this, check those guys' books out. Closer Encounters by Jason Reza Giorgiani, and pretty much anything by Walter Bosley. This is like a reoccurring theme through a lot of his writing. So, okay. Sonora Aero Club. What's up with these guys? Well, there are a bunch of Germans, a couple Italians, like I said, who sort of bought this land in Sonora, California, and they were working on flying machines. And I'm talking like strange designs. And Charles Dellschau was one of these sort of designers of a lot of these potential flying machines. As a matter of fact, people didn't know that this was in any way connected to the 1897 Airship Mystery until they found Dellschau's drawings and books and notes, etc., in a trash pile. According to the Dellschau book, the pamphlet and art book I've got, It says, for 40 years, Dellschau's thousands of plates moldered in the darkness of a closed attic, gathering dust. Sometime in the 1960s, there was a fire elsewhere in the house, and the fire inspector said to clear the debris out of the attic. After 4 decades in the secret dark, gently waiting, the aura of 20 years of solitary late-night concentration into the depths of shadowy and slightly sinister corners over the pieces of sad furniture with sheets flung over them and gathering dust, Dellschau's life work was carried unceremoniously out into the light of day and literally left in a heap in the gutter. It was born in the gutter, you might say, so the book says. So the first venue for Dellschau's oeuvre was his bedroom, the second an attic, the third a heap in the gutter. From this point, there is uncertainty, and 2 versions have emerged. First, that a furniture refinisher named Fred Washington makes his rounds to see what people have thrown out, found Dellschau's stuff, and took it to his shop in Houston, called the OK Trading Post. Another version adds another pair of hands and another transaction. The heap in the gutter, on this account, was taken to the dump by a garbage truck, and in the junkyard, a nameless picker found it and sold it to Fred Washington for $100. So, from there, Fred Washington, the man who found these things in the gutter, he puts them in his shop and just has them kind of lying around. And there's about 10 of these books, I believe, 10 to 12 books, full of art. And every one of these artistic plates that Dellschau has done, they're very intricate. There's all kinds of weird secret notes, coded messages, strange little drawings of men, men and machines, people doing things. It's very, God, and I will post up as many of these plates as I can find. You really just have to see them. They're, like I said, they're very intricate, but a lot of people, including aeronautical engineers even, have looked at these designs and said, like, yeah, these could work. So there's a high plausibility to these designs, especially, making it weirder because these are, pre-Wright brothers by at least 50 years. Like, I want to say the Wright brothers, that was like 1917, 1912, somewhere in the 1910s. So, this is 1860s we're talking here. Like I said, like at least 50 years. And the reason they talk about Dellschau's drawings also having the same mechanisms keep showing up on the inside of these machines. The same motors, the same force that causes them to fly and work, basically. So that keeps reappearing, and it's just the outside sort of the redesigns of the ships themselves, more or less. People started saying, like, oh, okay, well, we've got these designs from the 1860s that look like, they may very likely well work. And also, what you have to keep in mind is that when I say airship, I'm not talking about UFOs. I'm not talking about blimps. I'm not talking about zeppelins. I'm not talking about airplanes necessarily. We're talking about weird, weird as fuck sort of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, like steampunk machines. That's what we're talking about here. This is also a very Texas-related subject because there was a crash in Aurora, Texas, which supposedly had an alien. It was an airship crash into a windmill in Aurora, Texas, back in 1897. I'm going to say right now, I'm going to say right now that Walter Bosley does not at all buy into the alien theory, especially with UFOs, because this airship mystery eventually does lead into UFOs. All the UFOs and the technology that it took to get there that we see today, these are all man-made and piloted by humans. Now, he's not saying that there are no aliens. He, in fact, says that there is influence from ancient aliens, if you want to call it that, or perhaps advanced civilizations. If there's any alien influence, at this point, it is to be, it's so far off into the past that it's negligible, basically. So by now, many of you are probably just as confused as I was starting. How does this lead into secret space programs and breakaway civilizations? Well, like I said, it's going to take about 100 years, but because we have the Sonora Aero Club in the no, I'm sorry, because we have the Sonora Aero Club in the 1860s coming up with what may be very plausible, very functional aeronautical machine ideas, like ones that will work according to certain experts who've looked at these designs, and putting this in juxtaposition with the various mystery airship sightings that took place throughout from 1860 forward throughout South America and North America, let alone other places in the world, potentially. But we're focusing on North America specifically and South America. What you got to do is, see, you got to take at least, you got to basically reframe aeronautical history and take it back about 50, 60 years and add that to it. So you've got 50, 60 years of potential advancement and better technology, or a jump on the technology secretly taking place. And behind the Sonora Aero Club are a group, a secret society, if you will, known as NIMZA. Now, that's NYMZA. NIMZA is, how to describe this? The name itself comes from potential, let's see. NIMZA is a potential secret society that goes all the way back into the antiquity of history, allegedly. potentially. This is the supposition made by Walter Bosley, at least, that this NIMZA group is related to various secret societies, specifically alchemists, hermetic societies, Freemasons, or pseudo-Masonic groups that have specifically held on to lost or ancient technologies or scientific advancements that were basically lost over history. Essentially, the argument can be made that if you have something like the Library of Alexandria, where all of your information is stored up in one place, it's very easy for all your shit to get destroyed and lose it, which is why today I think that the desovereignization of information and data is an important thing, but that's a whole nother side quest issue. That's why we need to have, accessibility. It's why everything needs better transparency as far as information goes. Anywho, so NIMZA supposedly had these connections to these alchemical and hermetic and pseudo-Masonic groups throughout history, and eventually became more or less a largely Germanic-based group of what were considerably, I guess they're what you would call mostly philosopher industrialists or philosopher scientists, because of course, as we all know, alchemy leads to chemistry, astrology to astronomy. So there's a lot of overlap, and this is about, late 1700s into the 1800s. And Prussia is still around. Prussia is, more or less, I guess you could consider it what would be the First Reich. if the Nazis are the Third Reich, then I'd say Prussia is maybe first or second. I think it would be second, actually. I think they count the Holy Roman Empire as first, and then because it was based out of Germany. And then you've got the Second Reich, which I guess is Prussia, and then Nazi Germany would be the Third Reich. So, and yes, this will play obviously into Nazis later on. Like I said, World War II is sort of the tipping point for all this, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So you've got this group, NIMZA. It's made up of hermeticists, alchemists, who are also bigwigs in science and industry, and all of them are also very wealthy. And these are the dudes that are sort of footing the bill for all this potential advancement in aeronautical technology. And a lot of people, specifically Walter Bosley, posit the question, well, if these dudes had access to flight and aeronautical technology, say in like World War One, why didn't they use it? Why didn't the Germans win World War One? And, history is forever altered. Well, the argument can be made that this group did not see the advantage. They didn't see profit or advantage in revealing themselves to the world in such a manner at such a time. Although there were many, many industrialists at the time who had heard of various flying machines that were supposedly in development and were willing to very much invest in them. As a matter of fact, some of the names associated with this NIMSA group and the people who sort of financed all this secret aeronautical engineering at this time were people you probably heard of. To give you a basic rundown of the mystery airship situation, I've got an article here from the July 1973 Fate magazine. Once again, always an awesome source because this was written, I find that the older sources like this, they can have a bit of mistaken information, but the closer you can get to the time frame that some of this stuff is happening, you can get a little bit of better accurate information. So, this article states, throughout history, innumerable groups, societies, and cults have organized, sometimes secretly, sometimes not, around an idea that in one way or another, they were in contact with quote-unquote higher beings who taught them and oversaw their lives. Almost every religion assumes its adherents were and are guided in this manner. So do cults and magicians, spiritualists, flying saucer contactees, and many others. Some gifted scientists and inventors have believed privately that non-human entities helped them in their work. In the 19th century, we believe man had neither the knowledge nor the means to build and fly heavier-than-air machines. We are equally sure that somebody was doing just that, and according to most eyewitness reports, the pilots of the ships appeared to be ordinary mortals, aka humans. Even if we reject Dellschau's accounts as senile ravings, we still must confront the quote-unquote impossible fact of the existence of airships and human occupants. Taking Dellschau seriously for the moment, we might postulate that in both Germany and the United States, specifically in California and New York, a secret cult of brilliant scientists, technicians, and inventors established contact with non-human agencies which told them how to construct aerial vessels but ordered them to keep the work under wraps. It is safe to assume that the German and American branches were in communication, and about 1848, some of the Germans immigrated to pool their efforts with those of the Americans. Perhaps 1848 was the crucial year. Perhaps the eastern branch of the society had decided to market the airship with or without the approval of their superiors. An advertisement appeared on the East Coast proclaiming that R. Porter and Company soon would have ships for air travel. For some unknown reason, nothing came of the plan, but by the 1850s, many of the Germans had set up shop near Sonora, California, with the Americans, and they were to spend the next several years conducting some incredible experiments. Dissension and dissatisfaction no doubt developed as the group came to realize they might never be allowed to give their quote-unquote arrows to the world. They may have hoped that someone, Dellschau calls him quote-unquote the right man, would arrive to defy the quote-unquote superiors and make the airships public property. Not all that public, of course. The group stood to collect a fortune for their enterprise. While airships were seen over America from time to time in the years before 1896, widespread sustained flights seemed to have become necessary in that year for whatever reason. To maintain secrecy in a period when airships for the first time would be observed widely, the Society agreed to plant a series of conflicting and therefore misleading claims. The ploy worked, of course. The quote-unquote superiors, the non-human entities, had their own ships, but they took care not to be seen, while their human agents captured the headlines. Conceivably, the human beings were little more than pawns in some cosmic game. The weirdest incidents, those putting airships in a paranormal framework, may well have been the important ones, while the more mundane sightings were designed only to distract attention, while the non-humans set about doing whatever they intended to accomplish. If Dellschau was lying, then we must revise our theory, only to exclude the German and Sonora, California headquarters. The existence of a secret society in contact with quote-unquote non-humans still can be inferred from other evidence. To pursue our initial hypothesis to its conclusion, let us suppose that Dellschau retired to Houston late in the 19th century, as in fact he did, depressed and discouraged because it looked as if the whole amazing business would remain a secret forever. Still intimidated by the quote-unquote superiors and afraid to speak directly, nonetheless, he determined to leave the world a series of clues in the hopes that someday a quote-unquote wonder weaver would find them and sew the entire dazzling fabric together. Too much to swallow, you say? But can you think of a better explanation, says Fate magazine. So this is sort of an outline as to what's going on, and a lot of people assume that these people, this group, this secret society, was in contact with higher intelligences, quote-unquote, the aliens. But, once again, as I said before, Walter Bosley says that it was so far in the past and just, as to be negligible. Humans essentially found it out themselves. He is not part of the modern ancient aliens, aliens did it, quote unquote, pseudo religion, as he puts it. This is all humans. This is human ingenuity, human technology. However, there may be connections to my nemesis of understanding from the last episode, occult ether physics. I still don't quite understand what the fuck any of that shit is. I'm reading up on it. I'm learning more. I promise. Hopefully I can wrap my mind around it a little better. I'm sort of getting some of it. But this sort of plays into various technologies that were supposedly developed by, of course, Tesla comes into this. There's a man named Keeley who did anti-gravity experiments in the mid to late 1800s and had connections to the Theosophical Society. As a matter of fact, Madame Blavatsky wrote very highly of him. Now, of course, everyone knows Tesla, so I don't think I have to go into him. Although there is a weird apocryphal story in Walter Bosley's book Origin about Tesla allegedly visiting Mars in 1903. There is some there is some weird pseudo-epigraphical history to sort of back this up, but supposedly some of his secret inventions and basically all the stuff that he was creating was going towards aeronautical exploration. And supposedly he, discovered access to some sort of quote-unquote teleforce, which usually people associate with the whole death ray thing and Tunguska, etc. Basically, the manipulation of this force would allow him to somehow pilot a ship through the atmosphere of Earth into the outer atmosphere, into space, and then using other planets such as Mars, for example, capitalizing on its own personal gravity to pull it into, Mars orbit. And Bosley postulates that there are two groups. There's an American group and a German group. I don't necessarily follow this line of logic, but I'll just lay it out real quick. He says that the American group basically left the planet in 1903 with or without Tesla and made it to Mars or the moon. And this is where you get the monoliths and buildings on Mars and things like that. These were built long ago before modern, satellite telemetry and space photography, etc. This is where the early breakaway civilization takes place, in his opinion. They basically saw how the 20th century was going to turn out. They saw what was around the corner and they were like, fuck this. So they fucking just packed up and left. But yeah, once these breakaway American group guys, once they got close into Mars or lunar orbit, they found that these monoliths and buildings had been there already and were basically just abandoned ruins. Yet somehow, possibly, there was some sort of mechanism left on, that some kind of tractor beam, it's theorized, that pulled them into planetary orbit and allowed them to basically access leftover technology from the ancient civilizations. And the whole ancient aliens things comes back into play in that this Nimza group, the name Nimza is basically a derivative of the word nameless, because these alien intelligences, quote unquote, like I mentioned before, they were so far in the past as to be negligible influences. Humanity basically figured it all out themselves, but this is the source of where, lost science and ancient technologies that have been lost to history, a modern civilization basically existed, and that there are warring factions, possibly, maybe just one. We have tons of myths about, an advanced civilization coming from the sky and teaching us all kinds of shit to basically seed civilization, science, agriculture, all the big ones. But there's a competing force. There are just as many myths about other creators and teachers of proto-humanity and civilization coming from out of the ocean. So you have these like fish people and or, Atlanteans. So there's this sort of reoccurring idea of good and bad forces, or at least, opposing warring forces, such as Atlantis and Lemuria. So should or, Satan or Lucifer and his angels being kicked out of heaven and thrown down underground and, blah, blah, blah. These are all like reoccurring myths that sort of may have a seed of actual reality and existence way back in the, prehistoric consciousness of mankind. And that's what sort of influenced all of these same reoccurring ideas in pre-flood civilization, ancient proto-humanity, etc., or a technologically and scientifically advanced pre-civilization society of humanity, etc. So once again, a lot of this, there is an ancient alien influence, but they sort of they're like deadbeat parents. They show up with an awesome Christmas present, like, here you go, and then leave back to whatever it is they're doing in outer space. So that's the ancient alien aspect, at least. The connection to the quote-unquote nameless, the pseudo-Lovecraftian ancient alien group or entities that left all the ancient technology and lost science, that this secret society of alchemists and eventually scientists and industrialists gathered together, kept secret via mystery cults and pseudo-Masonic groups, etc., hermetic orders throughout history, and sort of cultivated it and kept it together. I am going to jump to Jason Reza Giorgiani's Closer Encounters because he has a perfect, I'll say a perfect sort of encapsulation of the Anglo-Saxon breakaway civilization. It goes something like this. Despite common misconceptions that the idea of a Nordic master race was the product of Nazi German ideologues, the fact is that it was actually conceived by a late 19th century Anglo-Saxon elite based in the United States of America, who closely collaborated with their Germanic kindred in Great Britain. Beginning in the 1890s and extending through the early 1940s, America was the frontier of eugenics. The brainchild of Francis Galton, 1822 to 1911, this was the idea that technological conveniences had increasingly sheltered human beings from the natural selection pressures of evolutionary biology, resulting in a quote-unquote dysgenic decline of the species, and that this could be reversed through a program of artificial selection for quote-unquote eugenic traits. Despite the claim of critics that this social Darwinism is a perversion of evolutionary theory, Galton was actually able to convince his half-cousin, Charles Darwin, of the soundness of his proposals. American scientists, moguls, and politicians of Anglo-Saxon ethnic extraction defined these eugenic traits in terms of the quintessential qualities of the putatively superior quote-unquote Nordic race, which the Germans later rebranded as the Aryan race. I think we all know how that went. The goal of the eugenics program was the artificially assisted evolution of eugenically bred Nordic people into a so-called master race, or Herrenvolk, of supermen, or Übermenschen. Who was spearheading this program? The Rockefeller Foundation, with research facilities at Rockefeller University, the Carnegie Institution, especially through its laboratory at Cold Spring Harbor, IBM, in service of, not me taking a shit, that's IBM, the computer company that's infamously associated with the Nazis, for their data processing and analysis. Harvard University, Princeton University, Yale University, Stanford University, Cornell Medical School, the American Medical Association, the American Museum of Natural History, the American Genetics Association, Margaret Sanger, who would found Planned Parenthood, President Woodrow Wilson, a majority of justices serving on the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. All these guys were pseudo-Nazis. Last, but as we shall see most significantly not least, there was also a railroad magnate named Edward H. Harriman and his financiers at Kuhn and Loeb. These Americans were in close contact with British collaborators that included Sir Ronald Fisher, Sir Julian Huxley, Sir Peter Medawar, J.B.S. Haldane, Francis Crick, Charles Spearman, Alexis Carrel, Bertrand Russell, Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw, who's a total fucking asshole, Arthur Balfour, Winston Churchill, Maynard Keynes, Sir William Beveridge, H.G. Wells and his Open Secret Society. I believe they're called the Fabians, the Eugenic Education Society, the Galton Laboratory in London, and the University College of London. Also all pseudo-Nazis. All of these individuals and institutions in the Anglo-American elite were spearheading eugenics for the purpose of the creation of a Nordic master race 2 or even 3 decades before the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, Heidelberg University, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany joined the game after Adolf Hitler, who envied Anglo-American eugenics, came to power in 1933. It took until 1934, a year after the Nazi seizure of power, for an American eugenicist to be quoted in the Richmond Times-Dispatch saying, "The Germans are beating us at our own game." The most dangerous game. Of course, this eugenicist was unaware of just how friendly the competition was and how many of the very same elite individuals and corporate institutions of America had actually built the Third Reich from the ground up. Nazi Germany was manufactured and financed by J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Allen Dulles, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, that other asshole who flew around the world, what's his name? He sacrificed his own baby in an Illuminati ritual. Charles Lindbergh, the Lindbergh baby. Henry Ford, General Motors, and once again IBM, almost exclusively operating from out of offices in Manhattan and vast estates on Long Island, New York City's wealthy suburb, the setting of The Great Gatsby, where Nikola Tesla, a Manhattan resident, also had his laboratory. As we shall see, the Nazi Party was set up by the Thule Society around 1920, but without the backing of these American magnates, it would have remained an irrelevant fringe party rather than the framework for a new Germanic empire. But let us get back to eugenics. Owing to the constitutional structure of the United States, the program was not conducted on a federal level, but on a state-by-state basis. The state of California, oddly enough, had the most aggressive of all eugenics programs in America, with Vermont, Virginia, Oregon, North Carolina, and South Carolina as runners-up. What all of these programs in various states shared in common was a two-pronged approach: mandatory sterilization of those considered dysgenic, and the establishment of societies that would provide incentive for the eugenic breeding of Nordic men and women who were considered to have the best genes. It was not only blacks, Mexicans, Native Americans, and Jews who were discriminated against, but also quote-unquote white trash, as well as epileptics, alcoholics, petty criminals, and the mentally ill from amongst the white population. The administration of IQ tests was a key component in eugenic criteria for which whites were selected for and which were selected against. Meanwhile, certain non-white populations, all I can do is laugh at this point. Meanwhile, certain non-white populations were automatically selected against on account of population-wide low intelligence. The eugenics endeavor was conceived by its elite architects to consist of successive phases. Phase 1 was to sterilize what were considered the lower tenth of the population of the United States, and to simultaneously form the nucleus of a Nordic master race through selective breeding. The final phase was the elimination of all undesirables, quote-unquote, and the creation of a utopia of brilliant and beautiful Nordics. But what was envisioned as the intermediate stage between the inception and the outcome? That question brings us to the idea of a breakaway civilization. In order to trace the connection between the concept of a Nordic master race and UFOs, we have to go back to the second half of the 19th century and focus on the intercontinental Anglo-Saxon network that linked incipient German nationalism with Germanic aristocrats in America. One of the biggest clues to fathoming the mystery of this occulted report can be found in the notebooks of a certain Charles Dellschau, who we talked about earlier. Now, he goes on to mention that Charles Dellschau also makes cryptic note of this NIMZA organization, but NIMZA, NYMZA, this is a close American phonetic version of the actual abbreviation, which is NJMZA. So this actually stands for Nationalistisches Jagdflugzeugmaschinen Salungamst National. Wait, hold on, let me do this again. Fucking German. Okay. Nationalistisches Jagdflugzeugmaschinen Salungamst. No, wait, that's Zalungsamt? Zalungsamt.
Nailed them all.
Okay, I knew I'd butcher that to a degree. But this basically translates to Nationalist Airship Pursuit / Exploration Project Office. So essentially, this is a Black Ops project, like cut and dry. That's what this is. It's not just a secret society, but it's a project office. Usually in the military, a project office is started before there is a sort of huge military rollout on something. This can include, skunk works, which is what this is as well. This is the definition of a skunk works. This is probably the prototypical skunk works that's ever existed, I would say. I don't know, at least the first major version in, pseudo history that we have context for. Giorgiani's Closer Encounters goes on to say, because those who founded NIMZA were occultists, and in 19th century Anglo-Germanic occult circles, the word NIMZA evoked the Nameless Ones, as mentioned before, the pseudo-Lovecraftian aliens from way back in ancient time. Recall at the time that there was no unified Germany. Prussia was the most powerful of a number of different countries that were either demographically or economically dominated by Germans, including the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, quote-unquote, nationalist in this context is an aspirational term. Now, like I said, there's, the First Reich, Second Reich, Third Reich's the charm, acquisition of property for these groups. Edward H. Harriman, the railroad magnate who owned about 60% of railroads in the United States at the time, he's the owner and CEO of Union Pacific and father of Avril and Roland Harriman, who would later become close friends and associates of Prescott Bush, father of CIA Director and President George H.W. Bush. And later on, if you want to get into the future a little bit, we've got, George W., who was in charge of the country during 9/11, which was perpetrated by, which was allegedly, quote unquote, we'll say, I'm just putting that out there for the sticklers, perpetrated by Islamic fundamentalists who, if you go back far enough in history, during the Nazi regime, Nazis were all over the Middle East, stirring up shit in Iran and Persia, or Iraq as we know it today. So these Muslim fundamentalist groups were essentially, funded and or kickstarted by Nazi groups back in the day. So a lot of the problems in the world can be traced back to the fucking Nazis again. And, jumping forward again into World War II, the argument can be made that we've talked about Ian Fleming before, the author of James Bond. He may or may not have based Spectre upon what was left over of the Nazi regime, because as far as we know, yes, Germany surrendered during the war, but not the Nazi party, allegedly. So they were hunted down. They were all over, South America, and, Nazi, or excuse me, I don't want to equate German with Nazi necessarily.
We have many tapestries.
But pre-Nazi Germans, these Prussian nationalists who were aching towards a nationalist collectivist union, they were all over South America. They were mining, they were setting up farms, all kinds of shit, for, at least 50 years before World War II. So that goes way back as well. There's a whole Argentina, South America, Bolivia, etc. connection between Germany and South America, and especially a lot of places that were funded or owned by Kuhn and Loeb Bank, who also owned 64% of the railroad miles in the United States through Harriman by the 1890s. Woo! Okay, I'm doing my best to encapsulate about 100 years of history. Okay, so some of these more telling airship encounters. I'm just going to go with a couple. And these are some of the most telling, I think, that sort of give away a lot of what is going on behind the scenes of these late 1890s airship encounters. So, April 17th, 1897, the Dallas Morning News ran a story to the effect that C.G. Williams of Greenville, Texas, had encountered a landed cigar-shaped quote-unquote airship and 3 of its crewmen. Williams was told that the ship sometimes travels to New York, and he was asked to mail some letters addressed to people there with the insistence that he not reveal the names on the envelopes. In exchange, the crewmen promised to take Williams on a quick, quote-unquote, trip to Mexico and South America and back. See? Boys from Brazil. Williams declined to get involved. What is most intriguing about their offer, though, is the connection to South America. Would they have landed on all of those acres acquired in Argentina by Prussian corporate colonialists, or on land belonging to any number of other German colonies in South America, perhaps in Paraguay? Within 48 hours of this incident on April 19, 1897, in Beaumont, Texas, a well-known businessman, J.B. Lagon of Magnolia Brewery, who I think is still around, the brewery at least, and his son, Charles, trekked to some lights that they saw in the distance on pasture land. It was around dusk, so when they arrived at the craft with the indigo sky behind it, they could not see the structure clearly, other than that it was a very strange quote-unquote flying machine. 4 men were standing beside it, and one of them, who introduced himself as quote-unquote Mr. Wilson, requested a bucket of water. While Lagon retrieved this for him, Wilson explained that he and his associates had flown down from Illinois, where electrically powered craft of their kind were being constructed so that they could visit the Gulf of Galveston. After a brief conversation, Wilson and the other mystery men boarded their contraption, and Lagon and his son watched the airship ascend and depart. The next day, on April 20th, 1897, the same airship was encountered by Sheriff H.W. Baylor of Uvalde, Texas. The thing literally landed in his backyard, which was no accident. Wilson, who was still on board, had probably told that the sheriff lived there. He actually looked for the former sheriff of Zavolia County, one C.C. Akers, and Wilson had told the sheriff that he had known Captain Akers back in 1877 when they had met in Fort Worth. He was disappointed not to be able to see him again, and he asked Baylor to send a message to Akers on his behalf. Baylor supplied Wilson and his men with water, and he agreed to keep their visit a secret, a promise which apparently the sheriff eventually broke. What is most interesting here is that Sheriff Baylor did reach out to Akers, whose letter back to Baylor was printed on April 27th in the Galveston Daily News, and according to the former Sheriff Akers, when he was a young man, he had known a Hiram Wilson of Goshen, New York, who was of a mechanical turn of mind and was then working on aerial navigation and something that would astonish the world. Now, this Wilson character shows up quite a bit throughout the airship mystery and into modern ufology. He's sort of like a secret anti-Tesla, like a shadowy supervillain of sorts that nobody really knows much about. And it's the whole Wilson family. There's this secret lineage of Machiavellian mad scientists of sorts who have something to do with man-made UFOs into today, even into the modern age. So, like I said, 100 years of history. Now, once again, we brought up Tesla earlier, and that sort of plays into the alleged propulsion system of these airships. A lot of people think that they might work on telluric currents, basically what the telegraph system works on, or worked on at the time. The proto phone lines, in essence. That and or ley lines or geomantic energies, Earth's natural electromagnetic forces. Somehow these airships tapped into that, and that was what their propulsion systems worked on. And as you can tell by these stories about them asking for buckets of water, somehow some sort of potential water propulsion engine system was involved that possibly, I don't know, burned hydrogen and released oxygen. That's just speculation on my part, but once again, later on in the 1950s and 60s, you have stories of people coming up with water burning engines, so who knows? Some would actually go on to speculate further that the possible propulsion method by which these airships worked was the notorious Vril energy, first postulated by Lord Bulwer-Lytton in the book Vril, The Coming Race. And man, I don't really need to tell you much more about that. That leads us right into all the Nazi shit. So there's that as well. Now, leading up from here, I think I'm at about, I'm definitely over an hour. So I kind of want to get to a good stopping point here. But there is a very comprehensive book on the entire airship mystery called Solving the Airship Mystery. It is by, let me see here, Michael Busby, a Texan from Plano, Texas, no less. Now, he posits 6 potential theories behind the goings on of what was actually taking place, like the real story behind what may have been behind all this airship mystery business in the turn of the century. He posits it down to about 6 different ideas, 2 of which I think are on the money or overlap to a degree. Now, the first is the great mass hysteria or pandemonium. This I don't buy. I don't think people are, I mean, say what you will about how stupid people were maybe back in the day, but I think they're going to know what the fuck they're looking at if they're looking up in the sky and seeing an airship, because it wasn't a common occurrence back then, and I think they know the difference between swamp gas and comets, etc. Then you have option number 2, a secret government project and subsequent cover-up. This I totally buy, and this is going to play into another theory that comes later on. You've also got, they were from another world. This I don't buy, because like I said, there are tons and tons of newspaper accounts of people meeting the pilots and crew of these craft, and they were all human. Now, there is one specific occasion where I believe a gentleman met with some of these crew members and they were speaking quote-unquote High German. So this adds to the entire NIMSA sort of pre-national German Prussian collective behind this whole thing. Then you have the option of the Great Railroad Hoax, because a lot of these sightings took place along the railroads. You have the involvement of Kuhn and Loeb, who owned all the railroads, Harriman as well. So they thought maybe that this was some kind of publicity stunt, but I don't necessarily buy that either. It doesn't make sense, really. You have the option of a great newspaper hoax. As many probably know, yellow journalism and turn-of-the-century newspapers love to post all kinds of bullshit stories and sensationalist brouhaha and propaganda. But once again, I don't buy this. There's just too damn many instances of sightings and interactions with these people. And finally, they were inventions of this world. Now, I basically lumped this in with, it was a secret project that was covered up or, stricken from the history books one way or another. This is the most likely theory, I think. Because if you're looking all the way back to Dellschau and the Sonora Aero Club, and you had these potential engineers and aeronauts who are building these machines 50 to 60 to 70 even years before the Wright brothers, you've got, that many years of advancement in technology taking place underneath people's noses. So, 50 to 60 to 70 years, that's a shit fucking, that's a whole lot of technological development. I mean, now just in the 20th century, or just now or just recently, in the past 20th century, technology advances at an exponential rate. So I'd say we were coming up on that in the late 1800s. So all of this makes this is the theory I go with the most. This is pretty much in line with Bosley's theory as well. Bosley, like I said, he postulates the two groups. I don't think there are two groups. I think there's only one. I think they were German, and I think they eventually were behind the Nazi Party. I think the Nazi Party had a huge part to play in the coming of secret space program and breakaway civilization type stuff going on in the 20th century. I say I'm in between his theory and Giorgiani's theory because Giorgiani, and I don't necessarily disagree with Giorgiani's theory. Giorgiani says that he goes into the whole UFO thing, which I don't want to get, like the modern UFO era, which I don't want to get too in the weeds on because I kind of want to talk about that in the next episode because this is going to have to be split in two. It's just so much. And I will say that he says that the Nazi secret space programs and breakaway civilizations and the fact that, like I said before, Germany surrendered, but the Nazis didn't. There could be a secret Nazi international. Joseph Farrell, the excellent researcher writer, posits this idea as well. I don't discount that at all. But Giorgiani takes it a step further and says that the Nordic aliens that we know from ufology of the last 100 years are in fact future Nazis. So I think I've mentioned this before in way back episodes. His theory goes into like time travel, etc. But once again, from what I've been reading on all these man-made UFOs, there are technologies that result in time distortions, etc., and strange temporal anomalies, but not necessarily time travel as we think about it in a fictional sense. There's another author who, wow, this dude, what's his name? The man who wrote the book Occult Ether Physics, which, like I said, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. His name's William Lyne, or Lynn, Lyne, also a Texan. This guy basically says that that time is just a concept, which, I mean, that's not a new idea, but basically you cannot travel within a concept. So, I don't know. I may be beg to differ. Depends on how psychedelic you want to get about it. But, yeah. He's the guy who wrote the Occult Ether Physics books, and he is all about, he says that this is all entirely, like all ufology of the 20th century and forward is all a human-controlled, man-made phenomenon. Not that there aren't aliens, not that there weren't, potential relations way back in mankind's past or potentially in the future. Not that they don't exist out there somewhere in space, but everything that happens on Earth that involves UFOs and flying saucers, this is all secret government, man-made technology that, the whole abduction scenario is a psyop. It's MK Ultra related shit. There's drugs and kidnapping and military abductions, etc. So, yeah, next episode, I'm going to try and tie up the last... Oh, man. Okay. So I guess today's episode is, 1800s to World War II, let's say. So we're stopping at World War II. I'll say that. And then next episode, we're going to talk about World War II into the modern era. Like I said, this is a huge, unwieldy topic. It's such a vast, quote-unquote, conspiracy, etc. So there's so much to get to and so much to talk about. But yeah, basically take all those elements that I've mentioned today, throw them all together, and that's basically the brain trust, the think tank, the secret society, the hermetic order, whatever you want to call it, that throughout history has encapsulated or archived and curated all these lost secrets of science and lost technologies from potential advanced pre-human civilization that were still human, possibly, but had relations with extraterrestrials, maybe, quote unquote, possibly, supposedly, allegedly. And yeah, that's all this stuff combined is what brings us to today. Or at least, let's say, World War II. So, We're going to stop at World War II because my brain can't handle all this history at once. And from that point, let's get into, we're going to close out with a true crime story. I'm surprised this one's not known way better. It is gruesome, and it leads into quite a bit of my own base speculation, but this involves a gruesome crime as well as cults and secret government. Let's say, how else can I put this? Organ trading, organ theft, organ smuggling, organ trading on the black market, or as it's called with any medical. I didn't know this until researching the organ trade, the illegal organ trade. It's not the black market, it's the red market. So anything that involves like, illegal medicines and doctors and anything like that it's basically considered red market across the globe. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but the reason it's probably not well known is because it took place in China, Nanjing, to be precise. Nanjing, for those who don't know, is, I'm going to say, a historically haunted place. Many horrible things happened there during World War II. I'm not going to go into it, but they basically called it the Rape of Nanjing. That's how bad it was. You don't get a historical event name like that for not having something pretty fucking god-awful go down. Anywho, this particular case, I'm going to give you the Wikipedia rundown to give you the particulars, and I'm going to jump into my own base speculation on this from what I know of other later historical facts. This case is known as the Nanjing University mutilation case. On January 19th, 1996, the mutilated remains of Diao Aiqing, who disappeared 9 days prior, were found across multiple locations on or near Nanjing University in Jiangsu, China. Diao Aiqing had been dismembered into over 2,000 pieces. There are pictures online, and I do not recommend you look at them unless you're into that, whatever. The case remains unsolved and is one of the most notorious crimes in the city. The case is officially known in China as the Nanjing 1-19 incident or 1-19 dismemberment case. Diao Aiqing was born on March 1976, it doesn't have a specific date, in Xinggao Jiangyan district in the Taizhou Jiangsu. She was the youngest of two siblings. According to her older sister, Diao Aihua, her family lived poorly, and she, Aihua, dropped out of school to find work. Meanwhile, Diao continued her studies and performed academically well. Diao successfully enrolled herself at Nanjing University. She arrived in Nanjing in October 1995 to attend the university's School of Adult Education. She majored in computer applications at the Department of Information Management. To avoid disrupting her studies, her family limited communications with Diao, even as far as not notifying her about the death of her grandfather and sister's marriage. Diao is described as introverted and simple. She also did not enjoy interacting with people. I could sympathize. On January 10th, 1996, in the evening, Diao and her dormitory roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electrical appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. The discovery of Diao's remains in the winter of January 19 was first reported by a sanitary worker who found meat in a bag. Initially thought to be pork, the worker brought it home for food. While preparing the meat, 3 human fingers were found. The worker reported the discovery to the police, who confirmed that they were indeed from a human. Human remains in plastic-wrapped packages were eventually discovered across 8 locations around the university, including at a stadium entrance gate, hospital, and along roadsides. The police later confirmed that the scattered remains were of Diao's and informed her father to visit Nanjing. Between January 20th and 30th, Diao's head and clothes were later found. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Remember that, because this may play into part of my theory. Crucial organs also, remember this, crucial organs, including the heart, liver, and spleen, were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel, which is probably the understatement of the fucking century. The officer added that pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision, only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or a surgeon. I'll say it again. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or a surgeon. Students and teachers became the subject of investigation. 2 suspects' profiles were brought up, including a single physically fit middle-aged male. However, the university department could not find any individuals that matched the characteristics of the profile. A major investigation was launched into the university and the areas surrounding, but no major clues of the crime were found, and the case failed to make any progress. In 2016, Nanjing police told the family of Diao that the case is still, quote-unquote, under investigation. Now, where I get into my own base speculation, let me also add that Nanjing University refunded Diao's tuition fees. Gee, thanks, guys. Diao's family left Nanjing for their hometown 5 days later. The Yangtze Evening Post published a photograph of Diao in a boyish haircut and reported that she was last seen in a red coat. The information sparked fear within the community of a killer targeting short-haired women in red coats. In 2021, Diao's family filed a lawsuit against Nanjing University for 1.62 million yen, or 246,000 US dollars for damages. Damn, I'd go higher than that. Diao Aihua said that the lawsuit was to, quote-unquote, seek justice rather than compensation. Okay. The case rose to prominence recently with the use of DNA evidence to solve past high-profile murder cases. It has been compared to the Los Angeles Black Dahlia due to its similarities. Once again, I said there are pictures. Look at your own risk. It's quite gruesome. Now, where I get into the base speculation, it turns out that this very same year, 1996, is when one of the very first small intestinal transplants, apparently, was performed successfully in China. The doctor who performed it and the doctors who worked at the university all became, at one point or another, suspects. Now, I don't really have any specific suspect names to give you, but I will say this. It was not long after this that you have a new religious organization, or if you want to use the word cult, be my guest. Seeing that this is communist China and religion is, I don't know, it's not exactly smiled upon by the state. I'm not sure what constitutes cult or new religion in China, so I'm going to just say, new religious group. And this new religious group was called Falun Gong, or Falun Dafa. It's basically a Tai Chi-centered religion. It's very controversial. The leader has said some pretty horrible things. But also, I mean, you're going to have to pick your villain here, because China's human rights history, human rights violation history is not exactly the cleanest. And that human rights violation history is especially so in regards to members of Falun Gong. They have been dubbed revolutionaries and threats to the state, etc., and have been intensely jailed for their beliefs. Like, there's been so many of them imprisoned and never heard from again. Once again, they may have some wacky beliefs, but that shit's unnecessary, obviously. You should be able to believe whatever wacky bullshit you want to believe, I know this is communist China we're talking about, but, that's just my 2 cents. Take it or leave it, China. Anyway, so this group, Falun Gong, once these members started getting, arrested and being, quote-unquote, disappeared into jail, not long after, you have a lot of stories coming out into the Western news about members of the Falun Gong or Falun Dafa disappearing, being imprisoned, and then, on top of that, having their organs stolen, having illegal operations performed on them to take organs away from them to be used on higher ups within the Japanese government, as well as, well-moneyed aristocrats who are, government associated. So there's a huge, you can do your own research on this, come to your own conclusions about maybe who the bad guy or the good guy is. I don't know. Like I said, it's cult versus Chinese government. so take it with a shot of the strongest bourbon you can find. The case is gruesome. The connections to the later human rights violations taking place by China against Falun Gong or Falun Dafa are horrendous. It's all, I don't know, the timing is strange to me. I'm sure I'm grasping at straws here connecting the two. I just think they're both. The timing is very strange because about when this is starting to happen is when you start hearing about Falun Gong coming into the news, and then the persecution by the Chinese government. They even set up like an entire office within the communist Chinese government named like Office 286 or something, because, a communist government, that's exactly what they name some program like this, Office 286, to deal with Falun Gong members and potential uprising, because apparently the communist Chinese government is super afraid of religious movements potentially galvanizing the public against, the oppressive regime, etc. So, yeah. Man, I almost want to include the links to the pictures, but I'm not going to do that to you. Like I said, you can look it up on your own and see how you like it from there. I don't know. So yeah, this is this day's episode. I wanted to get this out before Christmas, hopefully, and then we'll pick up the second part next week. It's going to be very Nazi heavy. I don't like giving those assholes the time of day if I can help it, but it can't be helped at this point. It has to be. They're integral to the story, and we're also going to talk about a woman who is unheard of, surprisingly. I find it strange that she's not more well known. She is one of the early precursors to people like Alex Jones. I mean that as in like, a conspiracy radio talking head sort who sort of has that kind of stuff going on. She's been a watchdog against fascism in the United States for a long time, and yeah, like I said, I'm just surprised she's not more well known. She's a historical figure, and we're going to get into her. She's the topic of our next episode, and that's going to lead us into all this Nazi mad science and UFOs rigmarole. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm doing this by the seat of my pants. I need to get it out. I just read all the books. I got to do it while it's fresh in my mind. Hopefully you have a joyous holiday. You don't get visited by the Christmas cannibal or the scarecrow or any of those other crazy characters, unless you're into that. But yeah, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast. I'm Mike. Hopefully I will see you next week. By the way, I think these are going to start coming out on weekends now because I just need the week to further study. Maybe I'll get this one out a little sooner before New Year's. Who knows? We'll try. That's all I can say. Anywho, yeah, thanks again for listening. Really appreciate it, you guys. Check out the socials. Check out the show notes. There'll be, pictures and added material, supplemental, visual aids. Sorry. There'll be supplemental material for you to check out. So yeah, get it in your eye holes. Thanks again for listening. See you next week, folks. Appreciate it.